All right, thank you. No problem. Good evening once more. I will be your facilitator for today as well. And today we are going to be looking at research gap identification. There's a process of gap identification in research, and also how to write a very decent rationale. In short, if you're looking towards publishing a systematic review, your first systematic review article, or you're writing any kind of research or any type of work or whatever be it, right? Now, the first thing you need to understand is that there is always a very fundamental aspect of your review if looking at the Prisma framework. So let's just take a look at the Prisma framework. There is always something we call the rationale in the Prisma framework. So when you go to Google, you type Prisma checklist. So I think we've downloaded it. So when you look at your Prisma checklist, the one in PDF, right? The very first thing in your Prisma checklist is your what? Your rationale. Remember that before you come towards your rationale, the first thing you need to talk about is usually your question, right? You need to have a certain research question that you're seeking to answer. So we need to understand that everything you're going to learn in the course of this training is going to be tailored down to what? To the items that are present in your what? In the Prisma checklist. So the Prisma checklist, the reason why I'm talking about the Prisma checklist, somebody might ask, what about other checklists? So the Prisma checklist is usually a widely used checklist, whenever we are performing any systematic review. Trust me, you don't have to worry. After this session, it's going to be very simple. I'm going to make it very, very simple for each and every one of you, and I'll be very glad, to see, the progress that we are going to make. So my name is David Innocent. So yeah, thank you. So what's going to be our outline for today? Our outline for today, we're going to talk about gaps in research, which is a very big problem. So it doesn't matter if you're doing your primary research or you're working on your laboratory study. Maybe let's say you have the type of you want to combine acetic acid with an alkaline solution, right? That is what you feel like you want to do, or you want to test the use of whatever thing. What inspires that research is as a result of what? Gap literature. So just take a look, have a look at this fish here, right? So this fish has a lot of what? Lines on the body. And inside of the lines of the body of this fish, there are what? Lots of what? There are lots of spaces which could look like gaps. So that's just what it means. So this fish here is just talking about our outline, right? So that lines on its body. So we're going to talk about the systematic review research gap. And so we'll try to understand gaps and now look at the systematic review research gap, because this training is designed to teach us how to identify our systematic review research gap. Now we're also going to talk about what is rationale in systematic review, right? So why do you do a systematic review? That is just what it's going to be. Right? We're also going to have a detailed explanation in it. It's a matter of fact, I've had a lot of PhD students, who have actually mentored in writing a systematic review, and most of these people are not just PhD holders. They are academic tutors. They are teaching in the university, right? And when they turn up their systematic review research rationale to me, it's a total mess, because it doesn't matter the amount of information you have, right? The most important thing is that If you don't have the ability to tell us why you have chosen that particular topic, you're wasting your time. Right? Your review is not going to be accepted and it's going to be thrown out from the journal. Like we had an acceptance last, I think, couple of weeks. That was 2 weeks ago. In the journal, that review was on Alzheimer's disease, right? So I did a meta-analysis on the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, right, for adults, both the ones with or without diabetes. Now, one very funny thing about the journal is that it's actually a very top-tier journal that we made that submission in January, and when we got that manuscript acceptance was just last week, at the last 2 weeks. So you can imagine the load of the amount of time it took for us to get that acceptance because of how rigorous the journal seems to be. So at the end of the day, it's more like we needed to, part of the revision was to provide a detailed gap. Why should we do this review? So if I might have done a very crazy meta-analysis, right? I might have used R, which is actually more like the programming software to do the meta-analysis. I've done everything really, really important. But then what the reviewers want is what I need to justify why that article needs to be published in that particular journal. Not just about the journal, but why it should be done. Right? Why is it that other articles, what is the difference between my own article and the ones that are already uploaded out there? That is just what rationale is. Why do we need this? Okay, yes, we need it because of funding. Okay, yes, we need it because certain studies have only used 12 randomized control trials. Now, I want to do a type of systematic review that I will combine cross-sectional studies. That's a reasonable rationale, right? So we are going to talk about that. I don't want to just really go into explanation in the outline. So we're also going to talk about the considerations in gap identification. What and what should we consider, right? What and what should we consider when we are identifying the gap in literature? So this is just what I call the winning approach. Like, this is what you don't know about. 99% of us here don't know about this, not until you view that slide. Yes, I'm really sure, because when you go out there on YouTube, you watch a lot of videos that are adding more to your problems. They end up confusing you. The more you watch that, the more confused you become. So the essence of this training is to address your problem. So we're just here to solve problems. So we're going to use what I call the tabulation approach. So I've had a friend, who is he just finished he finished his PhD in health policy framework, right, in the United Kingdom. So he's actually been asking me a lot of questions every time. And the question he has been asking me is, how can we really find the gap in literature? And this question is actually, I've had myself, I've faced this question for like, over 2 years now, like even while he was in his PhD, right? Asking that question, okay, let's say, for example, I'm thinking about diabetes, right? I'm thinking about diabetes. How can I get that gap, right? So I'm just here to answer his question, right? So you might not actually be in this session, but we've always come up with an answer. But then at the end of the day, it's just like this answer that your PhD student is giving, like, looking very crazy or more confusing, because personally, I'm somebody that I don't really like to talk so much about research. When I meet some of my top tier scholars, I just want to just keep quiet. I just want to listen to them. I just want to hear all they have to say. Most times when I'm in that gathering, I just behave as though I don't really know what I'm doing. So that at the end of the day, you get to even find the gap in their knowledge. You get to understand all they know. So you need to talk less and listen more as possible, right? That is usually the best approach in research. So I'm going to talk about what we call the Boolean search method, but I'm not really going to go deep into this aspect, right? Because in our future training, we're going to also address how to do a Boolean search, particularly in our search strategy. There's what we call search strategy in our systematic review. But I'm not really going to talk about it. So don't worry. I'm just going to talk about the basic, Boolean search methods that you need if you want to start you just formulated a systematic review question and you want to start looking for gaps in literature, right? Then I'm just going to tell you about the short Boolean approach you need to use. So we're going to look at where to start. We're going to perform a practical, and I have practice questions for each and every one of you. So I'm going to forward this slideshow to your email. You know what I mean? You've got to go through those questions and practice it, because practice makes perfect, right? You can decide to become a programmer today and literally watch thousands of videos. If you can decide to become a systematic reviewer today, just watch a couple of videos, start practicing. It doesn't matter how foolish it looks today. You don't really need to tell your friend that you're practicing. Just catch them, when you're already an expert, and they'll be like, wow, so this guy is really, really, really very decent. So this guy really knows what he's talking about. So this is an approach that you can actually use to make a lot of money. There are a lot of people out there. There are a lot of consults out there that actually need your what? They need your knowledge, right? So systematic review is really an underpreached, I would really say an underpreached area, where a lot of people don't really give attention, because not so many people are really, really to go through the stress. So that is why when I tell students that I've reviewed, lots of they are reading the hundreds of systematic review dissertation, not just because I just wish to write it, but because I just have to do it, because that is the skill that I've got, and mentoring students, on how to write, reviews, like it's really, really crazy. So you can think beyond the box. You can try to say, yeah, after attending this training, I want to really gain a lot, because not everybody's going to get this training. It doesn't matter how much I'm going to expend this. It's like a baby, but I'm sure that if I have a child and my child is watching this video, at the end of this video, my child should be able to come up with 27,000 questions as a result of gaps, right? Then after identifying those gaps, you can be able to do the whole magic. You can literally perform the whole magic for you to do your systematic review. So I just hope our brain is fresh. Remember yesterday when we talked about research question, we talked about, and most times, it is your supervisor that identifies the gaps. Your supervisor, my colleague. Like I have a friend, a very good friend. She's my very fantastic friend. She was back then when I used to be when I used to be a student leader, another, university. I think she was working with her supervisor, and yeah, she was my vice then. Her supervisor gave her, asked her to develop a game. So you can imagine how crazy that looks like. So most times when I get to think, I'm like, really? So there are some people that are working on a game for malaria. That's a gap. That's a gap. That's a gap in literature. So what it means is that, yeah, people were able to identify that, yeah, a lot of people get information about malaria, maybe through community, maybe community outreach and all that. So people are on their phones every day. Like 99% of us watch TikTok today. Why are we saying 99% of us watch TikTok? Because I never watched TikTok. Like I wasn't really on TikTok today. So when you remove me, so it doesn't matter if everybody in the world watch TikTok today. I wasn't really there. But I'm not saying TikTok is bad. You can go on TikTok and watch systematic review videos, right? So you can really, really get them. Just reset your algorithm and you get it. But I know it can really be bored compared to those trending things that are happening. So I never know what is trending right now on TikTok, but I'm sure we all know it. So it's nice that we know it. So while we know it, we can now use it to combine variables when we get to the practical approach of this. So as I was saying, my friend, she was working on the malaria game. So I think their team developed the malaria game. It was really, really, really very fantastic. And that was really very impressive. Seeing people develop a malaria game. When you play the malaria game, you get more information about malaria prevention. And it's out there on Play Store. So it's the more we come up with topics, the more gaps are being identified. So let's dive in. So look at this picture. This is a very beautiful picture. I'm really a picture guy. I really love examples. Now, if you remember back this afternoon when an email was sent across to each and every one of you, if you really looked at your email, I don't know what you guys thought about the email, but I'm sure a lot of you got thinking, what's these guys really talk about? What's this something researching guys? What do they really have on their mind? Now, when you look at that picture, you can imagine me because I'm certainly the oldest person on earth, right? So I'm sure if you see my face, you see that I'm really a very old guy. Like I'm 90, I'm gonna be 97 next year. But that's very funny.
Jeez.
So yes. So yeah. Now a question was asked there. So there was a time in 1912, right, when none of your grandfather has been born. Then we were using a hand fan, right? So let's say there's a problem. What's the problem? You're feeling hot, right? So you're using a hand fan to fan yourself, right? So now, while I was fanning myself that back then in 1912 or 1914, before the Second World War, right? Before Hitler decided to conquer the world again, my hands were hurting, really hurting. So electricity came in. So I decided to do what? Manufacture. So I and my team members, right? All my team members are quite old, and so we decided to come up with an electrical fan. Now, what initiated us coming up with an electrical fan is what? Problem, gap. No, everybody was using a hand fan. What is new? What? An electric fan, right? Or what you can call a ceiling fan. But along the line, why people kept on changing from a yellow electric fan to pink one to rechargeable electric fan to a lot of ceiling fan, whatever type of ceiling fan it wants to be, or be it electric or whatever, right? Somebody now decided to say, okay, and I decided to say, okay, this electric fan is making noise because I can't be having this Zoom class or this meeting, this Google Meet class, and it's making noise. Let me come up with with an air conditioner, right? So I came up with an air conditioner, right? So I'm chilling, no noise now. So I've solved another problem. Now it has created another gap, another problem, which is what? I'm now feeling so cold. Now look at this baby. This baby is standing on the paradigm, right? Now the baby has a research question. Now they are all looking at their research questions, right? Now they are thinking about something new. So that is now me with inside of that system where I have that air conditioner, right? So the air conditioner is now blowing me and I'm feeling very cold. Now I'm sick. Now, what is next? That is the question mark. I'm sure that 99% of us here cannot think about the next intervention to solve to remove what can replace an air conditioner. How many of us are thinking about that now? So now, you thinking about that is what we call what? That is the gap in knowledge. That is just the gap. So I've just tried to explain the gap in knowledge what? In a very simple aspect. So that is what happens in research every day. That is just what happens in life. In short, I do tell people that research is the only course that cannot be eliminated in the university. It's something it is just what we do, right? The fact that we were all putting on in sandals. Now we now decided to say no. We can actually put on something that can actually cover our legs. Maybe the prophet Moses in the Bible was always wearing his sandals. Now later, their legs were getting hot. Now somebody now came up with an innovation to close that gap by doing what? By coming up with a shoe. Now we've opened that gap again to come up with a more fancy shoe that looks like a sandal. Now tomorrow somebody will close that gap again and come up with that. That is just what happens every day. So it doesn't matter whether it's in clinical field. Let's say there is a new drug now to manage HIV, right? So we have a lot of new drugs that have gone through several trials. Right? So what researchers are doing now is that they are coming up with a type of intervention, right? Maybe be it a class A, HIV therapeutic, or class B, a type of class C or whatever, that can stop or that can inhibit, that division, right, in the cell. So this is just what happens every day. So it doesn't matter whether you're in the field of social sciences. It doesn't matter whether you're in the field of arts. It doesn't matter. Research is going on, and it doesn't matter the type of systematic review you're working on. Research gaps are existing, and we will continue to close those gaps till somebody that owns this world blows the final whistle and we're all gone. So that is what will continue. There will never be a time that all the gaps in research are being closed. It's such as a matter of fact, once there is an intervention, there is now a gap. Like I told you about my friend who worked on a video game, right? So sorry, they worked on an app. Now somebody can also come up with another gap now that's inside that malaria app that they worked on. It is maybe they just came up with a user interface. Maybe the user interface in the malaria app was just asking questions. Somebody can also come up with another gap of maybe there is a gap in literature. Is there any type of malaria app, malaria health communication app that can show videos? Now, if they are available, can we do a systematic review on it? We will definitely come to that. Now, that's the question here, which I've already explained, so I'm not really going to waste so much time here. So what's the research gap? So the research gap is just an area within a field where existing research is incomplete, lacks sufficient evidence, or has not been explored thoroughly. So that's what I say. So when you come to the field of biology, biology is so broad. You have to go deep. Let's say you come into cellular biology, right? Inside cellular biology, it's still so broad. You go inside one of the aspects of cellular biology, it's still so broad, right? So you have to continue to narrow it down. Trust me, whoever happens to be, whoever happens to be watching this video should be able to formulate and identify a lot of gaps in literature, considering the detailed approach that we're going to use. Now, imagine for a 7-year-old now, you are doing a big puzzle and you notice that there's some missing pieces. Now, those empty spaces now, here are those gaps. So in research, a gap is just like something we don't know yet. So if my friend who worked on a malaria app for health communication now, if she has not done anything on a video-based game, or if it is not in existence, that means there is a gap there. Now there could be a video-based game gap, a video-based game application, right? Then there could also be another gap of something inside of that game that is still missing. So in life, there are gaps. That is why you see a lot of people in a lot of relationships, and there's a lot of gaps in the relationship. But I don't really go into that now. So this is also another example of gap, a man trying to fill a gap, he's trying to bridge that gap, right? So what will happen to this man? At the end of the day, at the end of him filling this gap, you will end up falling in and also create what? Another gap. So you can never fill what? It's very difficult to fill gaps in research. But the major aim of this session is to do what? To have that ability to do what? To identify gaps. So I'm sure each and every one of us now understand what gaps clearly means in research. Now, we're talking just about research and it's broad because our major business is the systematic review gap. Now, in systematic review, now the gap refers to just areas within the literature review that is missing. So let's say when we start our search now, right, and we want to identify the gap in literature, right, we need to put in a lot of consideration. This is what to do. Let's say I've just published a research. I'm going to also show an example of one of my publications, right? One of my systematic review publications. Let's say now I've worked on metformin versus glyburide. That was one of my publications last year. Yes, I think we compared two interventions, right, for diabetic patients. The usage of metformin versus what? Glyburide. So glyburide is a class of what? It's a class of what? Diabetic drug that is used for what? That is mostly used in either maybe gestational diabetes or maybe type 2 diabetes, right? Now, after that review now, does it mean that I've closed all the literature review gap for metformin among glyburide? Maybe I might have focused my population among pregnant women. Now it means that there is still gap. I haven't really specifically reviewed that gap. I haven't reviewed a lot of primary studies on, let's say, for example, among maybe older adults, or maybe adults now in the United Kingdom, maybe adults in China, maybe pediatrics. So you see that it is practically impossible for you to close all the gaps, but it's very, 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 very easy to identify a gap. I've had a lot of friends who might ask me, please, I'm struggling with this title. Can you help me identify a gap? I don't even need to open I don't even need to open the database. Looking at that title, I will identify 25 different gaps in literature. And they'll be like, how did it, how? Which is very simple. Just looking at the question alone, you can be able to do what? Identify. Just change the type. Either you tweak the population, or you reduce the study setting, or you tweak whichever it be. Right? You might be able to come up with a gap. And now, what for you to now be sure that that is a gap? It means that what we now need to do what go into databases, credible databases, and do detailed search to make sure, right, that we have those gaps in check. So we're going to do a lot. We're going to practice a couple of examples here to make it fantastic for us. It doesn't matter your background, whether you're in chemistry, whether you're in physiology, whether you're in horticulture, or whether you're a pharmacist, or whatever thing you are, whether you're studying pornography or whatever, there are gaps in literature, even in pornography. So it doesn't matter whatever thing it be, right? It's your ability to do what? To play around the variables and identify. So let's say a 7-year-old, right, who is reading a bunch of books on dinosaurs. So, and you notice that none of those books talk about how fast they can run. Maybe all those books are primary studies now, right? Or let's say they're actually systematic reviews that has been conducted. Because when you are identifying your systematic review gap, you are not looking for primary studies. You are looking for systematic reviews, similar systematic reviews, to see how you can come up with your own. Now, it's different from doing a research, your research gap for your project. Let's say you're an undergraduate here, and an undergraduate, mostly how we identify gap is usually when we just, let's say you got a topic now, prevalence of diabetes in Owerri, Nigeria, for example, right? In Owerri town in Nigeria. It's just simple for you to say, somebody in APSU to say, to make the justification that, yes, I have not found any study online that has conducted prevalence of diabetes in Nigeria, but I have seen a study in Owerri. Therefore, conducting a study on prevalence of maybe malaria in Owerri, in Abia State, it is pertinent. So that way the person is able to play around and identify that. But it is very difficult for you to come up with that gap that way, because you should have done a detailed study. So when your supervisor asks you to go and look for a topic, right, the first thing that should come to your mind is what we've talked about, which is what you need to have a clear paradigm. Where are you standing on? Are you a positivist? Are you an interpretivist? Or are you trying to use a mixed method approach? So you should always have something in mind, in consideration. Maybe you've had an experience with somebody. You watched a video on TikTok today, and the video was talking about domestic violence. That could be, in short, that is what we are going to use. We use that particular variable to identify systematic review gap, domestic violence. Right? So you just watched a video on TikTok and you talk about domestic violence. Now, you need to use that. I'm going to teach you how to use that particular, just only domestic violence as a topic, as what you're thinking in your brain. You can use it to do what? Look for systematic reviews and identify gaps in literature. So gap identification is not usually something that takes, that you can do in a snapshot, particularly for systematic review, because one problem most PhD students always have is that they feel that their research is unique. Reason, because they don't search. So we have a lot of databases out there. We have the PubMed, we have the Medline, we have the Rationale, which is the cumulative index for nursing literature, right? So we have EBSCO, we have the Schemago, we have the Scopus, we have the AJO, African Journal Online, we have Science Direct, a lot of them. We have a lot of databases out there. And now, one thing you need to understand is that most times when you're writing about your gap, because we're talking about gap and rationale. These are two terms that works hand in hand when you're writing a systematic review, right? You will notice that in this our systematic review discussion, we're talking about gap and we're also talking about rationale. So both of them are together, because for you to justify your systematic review, it means that you've identified a gap, right? Although there are still other considerations that you can use to justify your systematic review, but mostly it must come from a gap identified, which is what really very easy. So identification of your gaps, just like this 7-year-old, right, means that what you have a lot of databases where you have to search. You need to search a lot, and not just you search on three databases and you start saying that I've not found it, therefore it has not been done. Who told you? So it's usually when if you've searched on those three databases and you want to use it to make a justification for your gap, it means that it has to be clearly stated that to the best of knowledge, following exhaustive search on so and so journals, so and so databases, right? And from so and so time period to so and so time period, it means that to the best of knowledge, there hasn't been any systematic review that has been conducted specifically on this, but there has been a similar review, maybe on this, that, right? Then that is the gap. That means that you want to now close that gap. So we're going to put in all these considerations. Don't worry, at the end of towards our later slides, right? We're going to see all the possible considerations in this life that can make you do what? Clearly identify gaps in systematic review. Remember that it's easy to come up with a research question based on our previous sessions. You can find a link in any of these videos, right? It's easy to do what? Identify gaps identify your research question. But then where the problem now comes, where most PhD students have the problem now is they find it very difficult to identify the gaps. So it doesn't matter whether it's an undergraduate student, or maybe you're a master's student, or maybe you're a clinician that is trying to write your report, write a systematic review report, right? It's very practical, right? For you to identify your gaps, it's just very simple. You do your search, formulate your blues, or do your sensitivity search, and you are there. You have all your likely titles matched out. So this is just some of the 7 core considerations that we use in putting some of our research, but I won't really I will talk about this in a more breakdown in a manner. I'm going to break it down. I broke it down in the previous slide, right? So first of all, we look at the evidence, right? What is the context, right? What is the context? What are we talking about now? Right? Most times, see, when the COVID-19 started, right? When the COVID-19 started, like 4 years ago. It's 4 years ago when it's almost 4 years when we started putting on masks. When we were putting on masks, right? So we started playing around variables, right? Based on previous evidence from maybe probably the flu, the coronavirus flu, maybe in 2002. I think sometime there was a particular variant, of the corona, that's that particular family of virus that actually maybe probably an endemic outbreak in 2002 or 2003 before we had that in 2020, right? It started in late 2019. So you see that evidence also built from the Spanish flu in 1914, right? 1914 or 1912. So you see that these are the type of research that we found in previous studies during an outbreak, can inform how we will do what, how we will identify our gaps. So that same thing applies to knowledge, practical knowledge gap. It could be based on methodology, it could be based on empirical evidence, it could be based on theoretical gap, and population. So I'm going to have a detailed, explanation of this. Now we just talked about our gap, right? Which we're going to also have a much more elaborate explanation of next slide. Now, what is our systematic review rationale, and how do we write our systematic review rationale? So it's not different from what I've just said, right? So the rationale in a systematic review is just the justification of why the review should be conducted. That is just it. Why do you need to do a systematic review, right? If you're writing your systematic review dissertation, right, it's usually very, very problematic in terms of you writing a rationale, because in our Prisma checklist, you find out that our systematic review rationale is clearly there. So it means that the very first argument you need to do is what? Why is that systematic review needed? Where are you coming from? What is the importance of that systematic review? We talked about in our previous session that a systematic review is important to inform what? Clinical decision making. That today, a clinician is going to put metformin ahead of glyburide, putting metformin at the first line treatment pathway, because this is the problem most clinical college students usually have, right? They want to do their systematic review rationale, and they don't tell us, maybe you're trying to do a drug to drug comparison, and you don't tell us which drug is on the first line of treatment pathway. Maybe clinicians, right? The experts are suggesting that you should use what? For a patient who is suffering from maybe diabetes, maybe diabetes with comorbidities, glyburide glyburide, right? It should be administered, right? Then if the patient is not responding to glyburide, then you should supplement it with what? Metformin. If they are not responding to metformin, then you could use a combination therapy of maybe glyburide and metformin, combination therapy. So now, somebody could come up to do a systematic review as that clinician. Let me say, I am that guy. I am that clinician who wants to do that systematic review. So I could say, okay, now the rationale, the reason why I want to do this systematic review is that I found out that there are a lot of systematic reviews out there that has compared glyburide and metformin individually. Now I want to compare glyburide versus glyburide combined with metformin. So that's a very tricky research question, right? So you want to compare one therapy versus a combination therapy, or you want to compare glyburide versus what? Versus maybe a placebo, or you want to compare what? Glyburide versus what? Maybe you want to compare glyburide versus any other form of intervention that is in your comparator group after you've learned how to do what? Formulate your research question. So that way you can be able to do what? Justify why you want to do that what? Research question. Maybe you make evidence that what? Based on your gap, that there is a lot of primary research that are addressed. There's a lot of randomized control trials, because randomized control trial is the primary research. So there's a lot of randomized control trials that are comparing glyburide and metformin. So it is important for us to have a systematic review. Why don't we combine all these primary research together to now have a proper systematic review that can now give an overall question? So we can now write to WHO and other clinicians based on policy, because our systematic review always have an implication for policy making. Remember that. So we can now write to them that glyburide should be used for what? Pregnant women who are at their 7th month, or maybe at their 2nd trimester, or maybe pregnant women in their 3rd trimester. So these things are very, very simple. These things are very, very easy. Like, they're just literally so simple that you can be sleeping in your room and ask a 4-year-old child to please write the rationale for that systematic review. And he or she picks up the marker and starts sketching. And when you look at it, you see, okay, yeah, this is the rationale. This is the reason why I should do this review. So imagine a 7-year-old who is being taught how to write a systematic review, right? So imagine it's just like you want to choose a game that you want to play, right? So it's just like saying, why do you want to play this game? Why have I chosen this game? What implication is my systematic review going to have to policy making? What implication? Why is my systematic review needed? Is there any gap? If it has already been done, why am I now doing it? Okay, yes, it has been done in 2015, and I want to provide what? An evidence. So back in, I think late in 2022, we conducted what we call a living systematic review. I know most of us might not have really heard about it. When we call it a living, something that is alive. There's something we call, you can look it up now on the internet. We call it a living systematic. So we conducted a living systematic review. Now, the idea behind that living systematic review was we're trying to compare antibiotic drugs. So it's an update that continues to go on. which we are going to be publishing what sometime in November, a living systematic review. So we continue to do what? It continues to do what? To be what? To be updated. So that is how crazy researchers has coming up with a living systematic review. The thing about a living systematic review is that you want you to close every possible gap. But yes, it's still impossible because for you to even consider that living question, that systematic review that you feel like I will continue to be alive, even if you die, there are still some other variables that are not captured. So that creates a what? Gap. So look at how this boy is frowning at you. The boy is really very angry with you because of what? He's asking you. You just started your PhD and you're really making a lot of noise because of what? You don't want to let us hear because of what? You can't write your systematic review rationale. Because most time once you start a PhD, what's really needed for me is to do come up with publication. You see a lot of PhDs who are trying to do what? Trying to manipulate themselves through. So this is practically how it works, right? We need to do what? And it's like, why do you want to do your research question? Why do you want to? Why is the systematic review important? What gap have you found? All these are going to be written in your rationale. So just consider yourself writing your systematic review rationale. You must make sure you, first of all, you might explain the problem. Maybe, let's say, I'm doing a systematic review on malaria in sub-Saharan Africa, as broad as it seems to be, right? First of all, I might say malaria is seen to be maybe one of the 10th or 4th or 5th leading cause of mortality in Africa. However, considering scoping or evidence from several diverse databases, systematic reviews that has been conducted are in Africa on malaria. Maybe it might have focused on maybe complication among pediatrics, maybe another systematic review by maybe Innocent 2019 addressed this, but it was in LMICs. Maybe another one formulated this. All these things will happen. Remember that you write your rationale only when you've identified the gap in literature. Because when you're writing the rationale for a systematic review, you need to cite similar topics, similar systematic review topics that nearly looked like your own. Or maybe you need to cite a systematic review topic that might look like your own, but the gap that you're trying to create now is that you want to provide an update. It must be cited in your systematic review rationale. That way you write an award-winning systematic review rationale. So at the end of the day, I make arguments that this is why I want to do this systematic review. That I have found this, that. However, there are this, that, and that primary studies that are available, which means a systematic review is needed. When a systematic review is usually needed is when there's already a lot of balls. There's a lot of balls around. There are a lot of small balls around. So we need to put them in a Ghana must go. Sorry, not in it. We need to put them in a bag. So don't mind me if you're from Ghana watching this. So we need to put them in a bag to say that this is what we have. We have what? A bag of red balls that behave this way. So when there are scattered primary studies, that is when a systematic review is needed. So you must justify why is a systematic review approach even relevant for you to write that particular research. All these things must be addressed in your rationale. Because if you just play around, these days you have a lot of students, using a lot of generative technologies to write their research, and it doesn't really help you. It doesn't help you because you miss out on a lot. For you to identify gap in literature, it must take some, at least it should take, let's say in a particular area now in research now, let's say I want to go as broad as malaria. To identify the gaps in research in malaria should take nothing less than almost a month or thereabout, because you have thousands of papers to look at. You have a lot of literature to review. You have a lot of comments to make, to come up, to shape out your own, to come up with why either your title is unique. But if you feel like you can just come up with any topic and just start working on it like that without even clearly coming up with any clear gap, it doesn't make any sense. And another potential benefit of identifying gaps, particularly before you start your systematic review, is that when you, on the process of you identifying gaps, you identify primary studies that you will use to do your systematic review, because systematic review cannot, in as much as we praise systematic reviews, or we rate it to be at the top of the hierarchy of evidence, there cannot be any systematic review without primary studies. In short, for you to have systematic reviews, there needs to be primary studies. So it means that primary studies, which are, when I mention primary studies, I mean the normal projects you write in your university, maybe when you go to one village or one community to go and collect data, then analyze it, and you use a cross-sectional design, or maybe you use a cohort design, or maybe you do a randomized control trial of drug, or maybe certain clinicians comes together, to do whatever type of primary study. Maybe people are recording what we call the retrospective cohort study, which is usually records in the hospital, right? So you find out that all these primary studies are very, very essential, because if they are not in existence, a systematic review cannot be possible. A systematic review is practically impossible if we're not publishing what primary studies. So it doesn't mean like we just all focus on doing a systematic review and leave the need to do primary study. If there is no primary study, we can practically do perform systematic review. So these are the arguments you need to make in writing your rationale. You must be very clear in your statements. First of all, remember I told you that you must make sure you do what? You've identified your gap in literature. You found what are the evidence that are available in the literature. Now, those evidence are what are going to inform your rationale. Now, also, you need to tell us the importance of your systematic review. You might be writing a systematic review for funding. Maybe you're looking for funding, and that is a very great need for you to do conduct your systematic, and that's the reason why you've chosen your topic, right? So it also means that you can also be writing a systematic review because of what? Because you feel that that's the best approach. Most students, when they, most students who actually enroll in, 1 year MPH programs, some of all these programs, master's programs, sometimes they find it very difficult to do a primary research because of the time. So systematic review can also be conducted because of what? Time. So all this, when we mention the word rationale, it means why. This guy here is asking the reason why we want to do it. So this is where everything starts. This is where everything blows up, right? This is where everything happens, right? So you might want it to, maybe you want to start your first systematic review now, right? Now, what are the things you need to consider when you're identifying your gaps, right? So first of all, you're looking at the population. So population is very broad. Even what I wrote here is not what that is captured in this slide is still not enough for you to have population. Now, when you're talking about your population, pregnant women. Now, even under pregnant women is very, very broad. We can have pregnant women in their first trimester, pregnant women in their third trimester, maybe pregnant women who are HIV positive.
Program.
Right?
Idea
Ridwan, please, can you unmute yourself?
So please. All right. So just as I was saying, right? So we can look at pregnant women, looking at pregnant women, right? It's just a lot. It's just very broad, right? So just look at all pregnant women. Pregnant women who are HIV positive, pregnant women who are diabetic, pregnant women who are suffering from malaria, pregnant women who are this. It's very broad. It can be women, just women. That's so broad. It can be mothers, old age mothers who are in the reproductive age, whatever thing it could be. So it could also be adult women. Maybe you're approaching your question from adult women, right? So when you're noting the gaps in literature, remember, we're going to do that. We're going to have a clear-cut practical now, right? So you're noting what are they adult women? What kind of adult women are they? Which type of adult women do you have in mind when you are approaching that particular question, right? So good. So it could be HIV positive adolescent, it could be adolescents, it could be school age adolescents, it could be anything, it could be women of childbearing age, pediatrics, maybe children, to the adults 15 to 50. Remember that you can make your argument in your rationale that you have found studies that have reviewed among adults or adult women and other, but to the best of your knowledge, you have not seen any systematic review that has specifically reviewed adults aged 15 to what? Sorry, 18 to what? 50. Now remember that for you to do a systematic review, I'm still going to talk about that, right? It means that you have primary studies that are likely similar to your what? Your research question. So when you're busy choosing any kind of funny population, right, just make sure you have primary studies that also addresses what? That question. We're also going to come into that. Don't worry, we're going to explain that very well when we're going to explain what our inclusion and exclusion criteria in writing what systematic reviews. Right? We're going to explain it in details for us. So it's going to be 18, it could be nurses, it could be depressed nurses, looks how funny that is, right? But I can tell you that I'm sure that there is gap in literature. There might not have been any study on, for example, prevalence of nurses who are depressed in the planet Mercury. That is the gap in literature. It sounds very stupid and funny, but that is pure what gap means. So it means that if I'm able to provide a justification or a rationale for me to conduct a study on prevalence of depressed nurses, prevalence of what? Depressed nurses in Mercury. So if I'm able to find primary studies that has conducted, that has been in Mercury, Mercury is a planet, right? One of the very hottest planets, right? If I'm able to find primary studies that has been conducted in that planet, and they focused on depressed nurses, these are primary studies now, and I've searched all the databases and I've not seen any systematic review that has addressed that specific question, that means there's a gap. That means we need that particular word, systematic review. And if it happens to be that depression in nurses is still getting very high, then that means that my review is very, very important. So that when policy makers, people who are going to console those nurses, people who are going to calm them down, people who are going to proffer drugs to those nurses, right, to calm them down, they can use the data from my systematic review to make what? That evidence. Because if WHO should say that what? That dietary supplements is important for what? Late fetal stage mothers. Now, if WHO wants to say that physical exercise program is very effective in reducing diabetes among adults, right? It means that that conclusion was not just, we need to ask ourselves this question. That conclusion was made as a result of what? A review from what? From a systematic review. So that means somebody summarized primary studies in several places. Maybe one primary study that did physical exercise in Tokyo, we combined it with another primary study that did physical exercise in maybe Japan, and another one in Kenya, another one in Nairobi, another one in Egypt, another one in lots of places, right? Then now summarize that overall, in the conclusion of that systematic review draft, person now said that overall, that based on this review, it is seen by what exercise reduces diabetes among adults. WHO, which is now a key leading agency, will pick up that evidence and publish it on the internet. And if you are depressed, if you're an adult that is depressed, go and engage yourself in what? Physical exercise program. So this is just literally how what gap identification works. Gap identification works by playing around variables. Then when you're done, when you've gotten that systematic review topic, you now do what we call what? Search for what primary studies. But we're going to talk about that aspect when we will talk about what our search strategy. Right. So we're also going to make a detailed video on how to do it, go about. So just like I said, when we are considering gaps, so it doesn't matter your field, maybe you're not in healthcare, at least you should have seen a data when you like in 2022, the first 5 days in 2022 had a publication from an organization that published that over 20 million abortions were done worldwide in what? In just the first week of what? 2022. Now, let's assume that is an evidence. Now, how do you think they came up with that data? How do we think that they came up with that data? Maybe somebody might have done a prevalence study on what? On abortion within that time range. And they were able to do what? Collate the data across what? Diverse studies and do what we call a meta-analysis, overall estimate. And that way, what? WHO can use it to do what? To inform practice. So you can also look at, websites like Cochrane Network. The Cochrane Network is a very, 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 very helpful network. I'm also going to share with us tomorrow on our last session for this program, right? Where we can actually look at some of these, networks where you find a lot of systematic reviews that are uploaded every day, a lot of interventions that are performed every day. And these updates are actually being made. So just like I said, for population, so we have a whole lot here to consider. Your population, you can be working among adults who are diagnosed with, diabetes, can be working among, whatever thing it needs to be. Another thing you need to understand is that if you're very smart, you can use your You can use your PICO framework to formulate your research gap. Based on population, you check out all the possible. Maybe you have something in mind. Maybe you have pregnant women in mind. You do all the search that is related to pregnant women. And when you find them, you now look for something distinct. The gap in literature now is something distinct among those pregnant women, among those studies, all those systematic reviews that did in pregnant women. What is the particular thing that they didn't note? Is it based on the age? Is it based on their weight? Is whatever thing that comes in your mind? In short, people come up with anything. Like I told you guys, there's no right or wrong in research. It's all about justification. If you're able to make your argument, if I'm able to mount an argument why I should do a prevalence of cancer among people in venues, and I'm able to come up with a strong argument there, then it should flow. Because things are happening every day in life. Tomorrow you see somebody that will come up with a wristwatch that can be used to do what? Stop anything. So this is just how it happens. So I wouldn't really want to waste so much time because I've already explained all these things, in details here. So based on intervention, let's say you're looking at interventions, right? So it could be dietary supplements, physical exercise. So what type of physical exercise? It's still broad. When you say dietary supplement, it's still broad. So it could be that maybe you're doing your PhD. I can do my PhD. I can do a PhD program on what? Dietary supplements. But I won't just do it on dietary supplement. I might just go deep into the chemical composition of a certain dietary complement. And when I come into that particular area, I need to now start thinking about what has everybody done and what can I do. Trust me, if you have this type of reasoning, or the way you apply it in research and you apply it to your daily life in how you make money or how you look for business ideas, right? You're going to make a lot of money. Because when, let's say somebody has a drug that you want to sell, you need to think about which population would my drug sell out for? Where is the gap? Where is the place where they're not having a lot of focus? Okay, now people are talking about, okay, let's say, for example, now in Kenya, they want to go on a protest, for example. Now, somebody who is a researcher can ask now, based on that protest, or let's say somebody who is into business, what is it? What business idea can I pitch that will sell at that protest? Okay, I'll say, okay, I'm going to sell so and so, because I'm going to have a population group of this and that, and the dietary intervention I'm going to sell to them is going to be this. That way, you identify a gap that's not what everybody is not seeing, and you see it. But most times we live our life based on trends. You're just going around topics. Looking at any single topic online, you should be able to spot out a gap with all the information that I've actually explored here. But I'm also going to show us an example. Remember, like I said, if you're starting your PhD and you want to identify a gap, my friend, you have to calm down. You have to sit down and do what? Follow the model that we're going to you know, I'm going to show you, right? You make comments, each particular framework, you make your comments, and at the end of the day, you make your overall comment, and you're able to do what? Rationalize your what? The gap in literature. So we're going to do those practice. So this is based on population and intervention. Now, it could also be based on location, right? Just like I said in primary research, we could identify gaps. Maybe this could be China, this could be India, this could be Nigeria, it could be South Africa, it could be Imo State, it could be in a patient clinic, it could be in hospital, it could be in whatever thing. Maybe you have pregnant women who are on dietary supplements, right? In what? Residential care homes. Maybe you're going to find a lot of pregnant women in this and that, but to the best of your knowledge, you've not seen any systematic review addressing the residential home. So this one, when you play around your variables, millions of, in short, it's a million factorial. In mathematics, there's something we call factorial, right? There's something we call factorial. When you play around all these things that I've even listed in, you can get billions of research questions, billions. And when it is when you now calm down and sit down, like you can be able to do what? Address them. Now, can you even imagine pregnant women who are what? Pregnant women, maybe vaccination programs for pregnant women in what? Refugee camps. Now, this way now, I've just posted my title here. It looks broad, but can you find how many research systematic reviews can you be able to find? Remember that gap identification is not just, we're not looking for topics now in gap identification, so you don't get confused. We are making sure that the topics we will have rationalized on, right? We have rationalized, or we want to make a rationale on, has not been conducted. Or there is something specific in that topic that you want to do what? Address. So it could be any of these, my friends. It could be any of these. It could be that maybe in developing country, in LMICs, in schools, universities, maybe it has been conducted in rural area, but you feel like you need to expand your population group, right? To conduct it in maybe remote areas or refugee camp, whatever. So this list is endless. It's endless. It's beyond what I listed. I would have added countries here, right? So I could come here now to add what? It could be in what? Africa. It could be in it could be in what? Mexico. It could be in Egypt, which is a very nice country where we'll be at soon. So it would be in any of these places, right? So this is just how it works. So it could even be that it has been conducted in Egypt. Maybe you're looking for a study that has compared between Egypt and Mexico. So whichever way, remember that what is going to justify it is that what? The ability that what? We have the what? Questions on what? And what the primary studies in check. So it could also be based on your outcomes. Maybe you're looking at, you want to do your PhD and you have a certain topic in mind, but you're thinking about maybe it hasn't really addressed mortality rates, maybe, and it's something that is perplexing your topic, or maybe you want something that is looking at patient satisfaction, maybe you want something that is looking at adherence to treatment, maybe you want something that is looking at reduction in disease, whatever thing. It could also communicate based on your work, on outcomes. It could be based on healthcare literacy, financial, economic cost savings, it could be based on disease prevention, it could be anything. It could also be based on what? Prevalence. You could also be looking at what? Prevalence. Prevalence could also be what? Part of your what? Part of the outcome. Right? So these are actually the things you need to do what? You need to put into what? Consideration. So you can also put prevalence. It could also be there. So also, now we're going to also put into what? The consideration, or the further considerations here could be based on designs. So you could also see a topic like a systematic review of randomized control trials. So the gap could be that other systematic reviews has used maybe randomized or has used maybe cross-sectional studies, because during the COVID, we worked on a systematic review on efficacy of remdesivir for what? For efficacy of remdesivir in reducing, symptoms of maybe COVID-19 among pregnant women. Now, some of the included studies we had, because then when the COVID just started around July or around maybe, I think that was around maybe say sometime this time during the pandemic 4 years ago. So when we were looking at some of the reviews, we couldn't find randomized control trials, right? Because not so many experiments has been conducted. The disease was just new. A lot of researchers, primary researchers, were still formulating research questions. Why we who are systematic reviewers are doing what? Combining them to make sure what we come up with what informed evidence. So what we needed to do was to use what? Use case studies. Case studies, some of them were cross-sectional studies of pregnant women who took remdesivir, some of the outcomes, and all that. So at the long run, if we are to revisit that systematic review now, we can actually identify a gap by stating clearly that randomized control trials that we want to conduct a systematic review that is purely using what randomized control trials. And if you are an epidemiologist, you will know that the gold standard of any clinical research control trials. Randomized control trials are the gold standard. Like they are the gold standard in conducting any systematic review of effect of intervention. When you're trying to determine the effect of intervention of any drug, randomized control trials are the one goes on. So it could also be that you want to do a mixed method review. Maybe that some systematic reviews that when you review that they've used just randomized control trials, right? You want to do what? A mixed method review that will combine both to get wide evidence. So it could be anything. Could be based on methodologies. Maybe it was a quantitative systematic review. Your gap identification now is that you've not seen a qualitative systematic review. It could be that you've seen this. Could be so these are just literally what it is. It's just getting that information, right, and aligning it, and you'll be able to do what? Identify your methodology. Now, the next one is going to be what? Based on our comparison group. Now, remember I told you that we performed a systematic review where we compared metformin and glyburide. Now, a gap that I can actually identify now is that we need to compare metformin and what? Vigilantamine, another type of drug, class A drug, for what? Managing what? Gestational diabetes. And in that situation, right, our gap identification is now based on what? Comparison group. So you can actually see a topic that also looks alike, the same topic, but instead of the intervention, it only considered interventions from what? Or it considered all type of duration of intervention in the inclusion of the study. So it means that your own gap now can be that you want to only conduct a systematic review, the same topic. Maybe it's even recent. It was just conducted in 2020, and you're conducting it in that same 2020. And your rationale, the gap you identified is that what? That it only considered, maybe in the intervention, it considered, let's say it's a drug, or let's say a systematic review that reviewed a lot of primary studies on, let's say, for example, on the efficacy of maybe antiretroviral therapy among adolescent patients, right? Good. And it was published in 2024. Now, you are still conducting that same research in 2024. Now, your gap in that study is not necessarily changing the population group, same population group, but now you're only considering ART interventions that were administered in each of your common study from 5 years and above. That way you've identified a gap, and what it means is that in your gap is that you're trying to prove a point. Remember that gap identification is that you want to prove a point. You want to prove a point that you might do for 5 years and above, and identify that maybe ART given to patients every 5 years is less effective compared to the one given in a duration of this. So it could inform your gap identification. It could be maybe adolescents throughout their maybe adults only during their adolescence period, their experiences of workplace violence among adults. But when you now open the abstract of the study, you begin to see that it was only during their adolescence years. So it means that it was more like a qualitative systematic review that reviewed qualitative study where adults were sampled and they were only talking about their adolescent period. And maybe you thought it was just asking them questions openly as adults. It's different to ask an adult, what experience have you had what have you had any sexual molestation? Let's say you ask a lady, have you been sexually molested? It's different from asking her a question. Maybe let's say that lady is aged, let's say a lady that is aged 40 years, and you ask her, have you been sexually molested before? It's a different question. Say her, have you been sexually molested during your adolescence period? That's different. And that's you can use it to do what? Identify your gaps in what? Selection of the study. So these are just how simple a systematic review can literally be when we do some of these practical. So it can also be based on health conditions. So you see this point, I can actually come up with loads of considerations out there. It will be based on health condition, right? It will be maybe diabetes. It's maybe so this is just literally what we just talked about initially, right? Maybe hypertension, cancer, heart disease. This one focus on mental health disorder. So these are just literally all the places where your variables should emanate from. In short, before you even start your systematic review, this should even be, at the front line. I want to do something on what? Cancer. Now, you want to do something on cancer. Cancer among who? Cancer where? Do you want to look at the phytochemical, or do you want to study cancer pathology? Do you want to go to the lab? What approach do you want to do? Is very broad. You can't be a PhD student and they're asking you what is your topic. I'm doing my PhD in cancer. No, it should be detailed. Cervical cancer research among adult women. I want to get their colonoscopy. I want to do whatever thing. I want to do whatever colorectal polyps or maybe any form of other cancer, prostate cancer or whatever. Right? So that is going to this is just even not going to literally be a consideration, but it's only going to be a consideration if you can say you want to do a systematic review among what? Several groups. So that way you want to identify your question. So now the next thing now is could be healthcare providers. What are healthcare providers? The midwives, the physiotherapists, the occupational. Because when you just do a topic on, let's say you found a systematic review online on workplace violence among healthcare providers, it's still very broad. It's still broad. There are a lot of gaps there. Somebody can actually say, no, I want to narrow it down. There's a gap in research. I want to do healthcare providers among doctors. It's still very broad for me among doctors. I might have to narrow it down again to say workplace violence, right? Among doctors who have worked for at least 1 year. And so you can keep narrowing it down. So the more likely you have to narrow your research down, your systematic review question down, the more likely you have a better rationale. So most PhD supervisors, remember your supervisor is usually going to influence it. Most times, most PhD supervisors always want their PhD students to do what? Narrow down their research. And that way it comes up with what? A very, very strong word. Rationale for the word. The title. So it could also be for the Western culture, right? So just like I say, high-income countries, LGBTQ group, aging population, disability communities, linguistic minorities. So all these things can actually inform you. Because maybe you could be doing your research question, you want to look at access to care, financial. So it's loads of things out there to consider, right? So you could be looking at infrastructure, maybe other research has focused on this. To the best of your knowledge, you've not found some systematic review that's focused on this. So it can also be based on policies, right? So let's say you find yourself in social practice, right? So you want to do your systematic review and you're making your argument, your gap argument based on what? Policy and practice. So just like I said, it could also be based on time duration. This is usually what we usually consider, right? So let's say, for example, you're only interested in systematic reviews that were conducted in the last 10 years. And that way you want to fix up your what? You want to fix your question. Or you're only interested in systematic reviews that were conducted from 2015 to 2024. That way you want to fix up your question. Or you're only interested in systematic reviews that were conducted in 2020, 19. You want to just check out if there are studies that are conducted within that same year and use it to do what? To make your argument. So what other things? We also have other things here. We know our measurement tools, could be based on questionnaires, the wearable technologies, theoretical frameworks. We can also use theoretical frameworks to formulate our systematic review question. Yeah, we can actually say, okay, I mean, the argument in this discussion has used what maybe the attachment theory, right? So you want to make your own argument by doing what? By using a much more model, social cognitive theory to do what? To make your argument. So there are a lot of things out there, that you can actually use to do what? To make a justification. Now, so we call it the Sentinels model for identification of systematic review. That's a systematic review gap. We call it the tabulation approach, right? So here we have the study author, the title, year, we have the objective, we have the type of population, we have the type of intervention, we have the approach, we have the studied setting, we have the type of outcome, we have the overall comment. So it's just an open loop, right? So you can change these headings as it suits you, right? In identification of your gap. So you can try to add your own heading. Maybe you're in chemistry, you're in biology, whatever, right? So you can actually add some of certain headings that are actually related to what you want to do. And it will also always come out, but you don't have to change the methodology. You don't have to change your type of outcome, but I think every other thing can possibly change depending on the nature of your discipline, right? So let's say you're in social sciences, let's say you're in arts or horticulture, and you want to conduct a systematic review. The systematic review is not just for healthcare sciences, for everybody. Everybody is a law student can start to do a systematic review. Once he or she follows the guideline, you must be there. It must just follow the guideline, do what you're supposed to do, and you're them. So kind of the type of intervention you might not really find there. Maybe here could be type of laws. Usually in our systematic review, there's a part where we will teach data extraction. So it's more similar there, but it's not really the same in the sense that the way we make our judgment here is not really going to be the same, but it's still almost the same thing, right? So don't worry, we're also going to explain this in just a snapshot practical. So let's practice. So we're going to have a very short practice for our systematic review gap identification. So we want to identify gap for a systematic review. I'm just going to do it very quickly. Now, listen, before we comment them, now we need to know that gap identification in a systematic review, right? It's not really very easy. A lot of PhD students find it very difficult, but I'm sure it's now very easy now, considering all the information, right? So one thing we need to understand is that I'm going to talk about what we call the Boolean approach, the Boolean search. Now, you don't have to worry. Don't worry yourself. When we talk about the search strategy, you also get to know about an extended method of doing your search. So what we call Boolean operators are just basically those search strings that we use in doing what? In refining and enhancing our research question. So I'm going to define that again. So Boolean operators are those search strings, right? They're those search strings that we use in doing what? In refining and enhancing our search strategy. So it means that, remember that we just talked about research gap, right? So it means that for us, how do we start? So that is usually what comes up in a question of a PhD student. How are we going to start? How are we going to start looking for it? First of all, we need to use the word the Boolean approach. What I call the what? The Boolean approach. Now, I'm going to do a practical. I'm going to use maybe workplace violence or maybe domestic violence. No, I'm going to do a system. I'm going to do a search on domestic violence to find possible topics that I can be able to come out if I am to choose a systematic review around domestic violence. So I'm going to give practical example. Now, what I call it is we call it an objective approach. So by being an objective approach is what we can see. Remember that in our previous lesson, we all agreed that that objective ontology means what? Reality, what we can see, right? So when you're trying to be objective, in your search strategy, right? It means that you have the key terms already and you're searching for it. When you're trying to be objective in choosing your topic, it means you're searching online to check possible research questions that will align with your own. When you're trying to be objective in your search, in your formulation of title, remember that it means that what you're thinking about fact, things that you can be able to measure with a questionnaire. That is what objectivism means. But let's say you want to formulate your research gap using a subjective process. You can't really do that most times because of what? You're not an expert. So a subjective approach means that based on your experience, you're not searching databases now. It means that the Boolean approach that we're going to explain now, the Boolean search approach, is not really going to be very clear to you. Because of what? You just use based on your experience. You feel like this has not been done. And you know that subjective experiences are usually very, very what? Are usually very, very difficult sometimes. But they also have their own what? Strengths, as well as their own what? Limitation. Now we want to practice. So now, when we talk about Boolean search, for the purpose of this class, we usually have three key terms, which is known as the or and the and the not. Now, what does the or mean? Now, imagine you want to search, example, let's say key terms, HIV and malaria. What are you looking at? Let's say, for example, imagine you want to, let's use this example before we use that as our practice. So imagine you want to find either oranges or mangoes. Now, using the or Boolean operator in your term means you're looking for either orange or mango, right? So it means that you might find articles that has what? Orange or mango. So you're going to find these baskets. So it means orange or mangoes. Now let's say if you want to use let's say if you want to find baskets that have oranges and mangoes now, for example, so you have to use what? Oranges and mangoes. So it means that, let's say for example now, we want to search, for example now, a real example now, we want to search oranges and now listen, pay attention now. If you're searching for oranges or mangoes now, it means that what? You're going to find baskets. You're going to find baskets that contains, maybe it contains oranges or it contains what? Mangoes. Right? So some of them might contain only oranges. Some of them might contain what? Only what? Mangoes. Or both. But when you're searching for mangoes and oranges, you must find only one basket. You have only one binary choice. When you use this Boolean search, you find this, and this. But when you use and, you only find this. It must contain only mangoes and oranges. So it means that if you want to find for the keyword now, malaria and diabetes, when we use the Boolean operator and, it means that what? We're only going to find peppers that have malaria and diabetes. inside of it. But if we search malaria or diabetes, so my find a paper said that only has malaria, it doesn't even have anything diabetes inside it. And as well as a paper that has only, diabetes and it doesn't have malaria inside. That is what the Boolean approach is all about. Now, let's go straight into practicals. One, just a short practical before we call it off.
Hello, sorry. Can you enlarge your screen? We can actually see very well.
Okay, all right. So can you see my screen now?
Oh, I mean, we can only view it as just like the way you can see the end of every attendee. So like it's not enlarged.
Okay, I will do that. I will do
I
that.
think you have to do that at your hand. So you have to kind of
Then you
enlarge
should
it
put
over
your
at your
full
hand.
screen. Full screen.
Or you should tip, yeah, actually. You can actually tip it.
All right. So now, so we're going to do a very good search, just for gap identification, for the sake of gap identification, right? And this gap identification process now is just going to be we're going to use two databases. One being, we're going to use, we're going to make use of two databases. So the databases that we're going to make use of now is what? We're going to use the PubMed and Google. Is correct. Scholar. Okay. Right. So let's just take off this. Okay, let's leave it. Let's leave it. Now, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you want to identify a gap? We're also going to teach us in the future what we call mesh terms and synonyms when you're writing a schematic. So when you're writing a schematic, literally, you have to identify mesh terms. What we call mesh terms. By mesh terms, we mean medical subject. Now, if it's not a medical term, you can use what? Synonyms, right? So if it's not a medical term, let's say, because mostly please mute your mic, please. The session is being recorded. Okay, so thank you. All right, so for if we are going to look at it, so if it's not a medical term, right? So for example, if we're working on a medical term now, like cancer, right? So usually the first thing we do is to search for the medical term, but I'm not going to talk about that now because we're not looking at detailed search strategy, but I'm just going to go straight to the point to look at some synonyms of domestic violence, right? So what we usually do in our search strategy is that we use our Boolean operators. I'm going to show that clearly, right? We use our Boolean operators to combine the spelling variants. Now let's say we're looking at the keyword. We have domestic violence, and we have what? Teenage marriage. Now what are we going to do? So I've listed out some synonyms for what? Domestic violence. Now pay attention. Now you want to identify the gaps in literature, right? So the first thing you're going to do, right, is to do what? The first thing you're going to do is to formulate your search terms. So let's say, for example, we're interested in domestic violence. Now this is how it goes. So don't worry. I'm going to explain search strategy in detail. We're going to have a more detailed session on what search strategy. Now let's say, for example, we'll start putting in all the terms, right? So say intimate partner violence. Now, in our search, looking at our term here, right? we have domestic violence and teenage marriage. So it means we have two key concepts here to examine, which is what? Teenage marriage, which can still be broken down into three: teenage and marriage, right? But we can put them in the same class: teenage marriage, then domestic violence in what? In another class. So if we want to go broad, we can just go this way, say domestic violence. Now, and what? Teenage marriage. Now, remember, we use the all Boolean operators only when we want to separate words. We want to separate spellings within the same spelling variant, right? So in this, for this example now, the domestic violence, all the synonyms of domestic violence is this. So it means that they are all in the same word, spelling variant. So if we want to have a more enhanced search term, we can say domestic violence. Or so don't worry, we will explain in details why we have all these, closing tags, here, opening tags here, right? So we have another this thing, we call it domestic violence. So you might decide to put it, you might decide not to put it, but most times, these things are database sensitive, which I'm going to explain. So we put it marital violence, relationship violence, we also go on to household violence. So we can continue going on and on and on. So I'm going to stop here. Partner abuse. Now, opening tag. This is an opening tag. So it means we have what? Another closing tag. So we now have and, which is another spelling variant, which is going to be what? Teenage marriage, right? Right? Then we close it. Now, this is just how our search usually looks like. So now let's say, for example, so I have this search, right? So I'm going to enter into what we call our joining fields, or something we call what? Our joining fields. So our joining fields now is going to be what? We go into our, maybe let's say we open National Library of Medicine. National Library of Medicine is NLM or PubMed. Open our PubMed. We also open another database known as, so we're also going to explain all this. Don't worry, the systematic review approach is well detailed, because when you look at this, when you look at the checklist, you see that everything is in line. We have the inclusion and exclusion criteria, we have the database, register, search strategy. So it is well detailed, right? So what we want to do now is here, we are dealing with our rationale and our gap, right? Good. So we go into NLM, which is National Library of Medicine, PubMed. So we can also go into what we call the European PMC, which is an extension. So there are lots of databases out there, right? So we have the Ajo database. So it depends. So this is what we call the joining fields. And this is also what we call the joining fields. You can also open Google Scholar, joining field, right? So this is more like the playground. This is where we play with our search terms, our keywords. Remember, what we are doing is what? Our search, we are trying to formulate our search strategy. So now, let me go take, for example, let's assume I'm just interested in diabetes and malaria. Diabetes is very broad. We have type 1, type 2, type 1, type 2, right? We have gestational diabetes and all that, right? So let me say, for example, I want to find my gap. I'm interested in doing a systematic review that is addressing diabetes and what? And malaria. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, if I put this, diabetes, right? What do I put next? Since I have just one time, I can put diabetes and malaria. Search. So I click on search. So I say clear all filters. So it means that what? What it means that is what it means now. Two things are happening here now. Now looking at diabetes and malaria, so it means that we might be missing out on a lot of articles because of what? We have not used the synonyms of what? We have not used the mesh terms for malaria and diabetes to expand our search. So let me give an example now. So if we want to now maybe do our look for systematic reviews, we might set our filter to what? Systematic reviews. So we are just left with what? We are left with what? 26 results. So if we want to have more results here, so it means that we have to now start thinking of what? Coming up with maybe say like diabetes or type 2 diabetes mellitus or maybe DM or diabetes mellitus. Because what happens whenever we hit our search is that there's something we call TAB. TAB. We call it what? TAB. So this is what? Let me show us what I mean. Something we call the. I'm still going to use this search because this is the example we're going to use. Something we can what? Something we can relate. So it's called it TAB key. So it means title, abstract, and keywords. So PubMed searches on what? Title, abstract, and what? Keyword. So what is another mesh term for malaria? Let's say, for example, now I put, or let's say, and I search. What did you notice? It has increased. It increased from what? 26, from 26 to what? 29. Now, the reason why the search increased is because of what? I haven't really given it what? Enough mesh terms. We might have up to 26 mesh terms. We have more than 50 mesh terms for only the word diabetes. Because then I could also add what? I could also add, because then I just put it inside one bracket. I could also add what? Type 2 diabetes mellitus, for example. So I could go on and continue adding and expanding. So when I now search, remember, I filtered it based on what? I'm only interested in what? Systematic reviews. Which means it is still possible that it might be likely possible that I might still miss out on one or two, but then it is very impossible because it is mostly very impossible in the database like PubMed, because once you filter it, it means it has sorted it out. So it has now searched all these terms on all the available systematic reviews that has all these terms. So it means that all the systematic reviews that I've found here now must contain type 2 diabetes, or it contains the title mellitus and DM or type 2 DM and all that. It contains either of these. What it means is that it contains, all the articles contains either of these and this must. So you can imagine typing a research question like, oh, sorry. So you can imagine typing a research question like malaria. That's a lot. 1,000. So if I now start playing around the mesh terms of malaria, you see that what? I begin to do what? See what? A lot more studies around it. So that is just all it means. First initial what? Hit. So it's very important that we do what we understand that. So when I pick my keyword, right? When I pick this keyword, let's say, for example, I launch it in what? Google Scholar. I set it to what? Review articles, my filter. So it means that what? I wouldn't really want to waste much of our time, right? So it means that what? I have to now do what? Go through over 3,016 what? Still results, checking them. So some of them I might not really need to open it because it's clear to me that it's a what? A narrative review article. So when I pick this, right? What's the first thing I do? The first thing I do what? Is to record the what? The title. So I might title this what? So I've started the gap process now. So we've started. So I might record it as what? I record it here as what? Jennings et al. 2017. Now, another filter and that I might want to apply is I might decide to apply a range. I'm only interested in 2010 or 2020 to what? 2024. I'm trying to use a combination of research questions, right, to make it seem very easy. So I must also apply another filter. So this filter further helps you in what? In narrowing down your what? Your research. That is the essence of all these search filter here. So I might apply the filter here to what? Last 10 years, right? And this is it. It has what? It has still what? Narrowed it what? It has narrowed it down. Let me leave it at malaria and what? HIV, for example. Right? So I've narrowed it down to what? The last 10 years, systematic reviews. I'm not going to include what? Randomized control trials because I am not doing a gap identification for what? For randomized control trials. If I was just doing only, maybe I want to conduct a randomized, or maybe I want to do my project, and my project is going to be an observational study. An observational study now is a study like most of your cross-sectional studies, your cohort studies, and all that, right? I try to take this off, put it here. See, I've taken it off and it has expanded it. And I put it in my what? Observational study. Right? So I have what? 61 results. So literally, the research actually is really, really, really going to be important. So let us focus on what? 2 questions to make it what? So we take this out. So you see, it's still big because it's showing for both observation and this. All right, so yes, so cool. Here, the first one is what? The first study we picked up was what? Jennings, I think Jennings et al. Right? Okay, let's pick the first study. So the first study is what? Evans et al. Right? So we record that. So let us start with much more approach. Evans et al. 215, right? So you could just call this your what? Your year, because usually the title and the objective are usually the same. So you could just move in your year here and leave this as your what? Title / what? Objective, because they are usually the same. Now, remember that before I come here, I'm trying to do what? Stretch out what? Possible gaps in literature. And this is the practical. And this is something you need to do on multiple databases. You need to do a lot of research to come up with, oh, this is what I have seen, but this is what that is what missing. Now, I'll now come down here. Now, pick up the title. Let me see, so I'm just interested in the title, right? Good. So this is what? Okay, what year was that? That is, okay, that is 20 what? 20 what? 22. So I could just put it here, 2022, literally, then I put it in. Now, what is the next comment that I will make here, right? Recent study, maybe. Now, listen. the comments you will make under your gap identification, right? First of all, it is going to be shaped based on your paradigm, where you are standing on, right? So more like there is no objective process in making this comment. Let's say the comment I might make in this comment, in this particular, for this particular, for somebody who is standing on what? On a subjective paradigm, someone that is looking for, or for, let's say, someone that is looking for a qualitative study, or the person is trying to draw ontology from experience, we might not really have the same comment, right? But it's more likely that we might have the same what? Overall comment, but which is likely because of what we are seeking at doing. So this is just like a short summary of how you can actually do your gap identification process. So when you look at this title here now, comments, right, you can actually say focused on what? On dating violence, right? Among youths, right? So this is clearly, right? So let's say here in the type of population, now focused, now in the title, focused on youth, didn't consider adults, didn't consider maybe youth aged maybe, or maybe it didn't specify youth. Remember, I'm making my judgments only based on the title, right? So here now, the type of population here is what? Youth. So if you're doing your PhD, if you are doing your PhD, and you need to read the title, you need to read the full text of this paper. So, but because of our time here, I'm just going to give us just more like a snapshot of what I just tried to do, to illustrate. So I'm just making my judgment here. My judgment here now is just literally based on what? On the title. So it didn't focus on, focused on you. It didn't focus on, okay, I've written this already, right? So it didn't focus on adults. Didn't specify youth age bracket. Are you seeing how magical it's working now? Maybe I now look at it. I'm still looking at only this study based on what? Now let's actually look at this study. Let's actually take a look at this study. And this is just a systematic review, which is simple to type. I just made it very easy. You put your hits, you filter it to reviews, you neglect narrative reviews. Those are not in your concern. So we look at, let's just read the abstract, right? So the dating relationship, you do see that dating relationship as an outcome, as a fundamental importance for you to expose to intimate this as adolescents, right? Now I'm looking at it now based on population group. I'm only concerned based on population group. That is the only thing I'm looking at. Now, it didn't talk about adults, which is a clear gap already. You just focused on adolescents. Did you look at the type age bracket? No, it didn't. Did you look at? It only looked at what type of adolescents did you look at? As adolescents, explore romantic, okay, intimate partner, young people. So you can now comment. You can now comment your likely gap, missing class. You can now say, remember, it's subjective. Your gap comments are coming from a subjective view. There are likely characteristics of adults missing. There's a whole lot of gap here, right? Now, what stage, what type of, okay, sorry, characteristics of adolescents, environment, adolescents or youth? Not addressing mental health among adults. Remember, I'm just coming up with comments to just widen your knowledge. the idea for gap identification is that when you pick up an article, you're able to make comments of things that you're not seeing in the what? In the what? Now, based on type of intervention or exposure. So this clearly explored teen what? Violence, right? So it means what type of dating violence? What type of dating violence? It said intimate partner violence. So probably he didn't in childhood. Now look at it. Quality of adults. So that means he didn't address it. Didn't address dating violence in what? In during adolescence. So for example, I'm just giving an example. It doesn't matter what it is. So let's say this study now relates to adults, and it said that. So you can now say that your gap based on this article that it didn't maybe address dating violence in what? During what? Adolescence. Do you understand? So these are just literally comments that you need to make. Now the next thing now, methodology. I can go on and on to write 1,000 of these because if you remember in our slide here, right? If you remember in our slide here, when we're talking about those considerations, right? Just think, when you come to the context of the participant, what are the other specific groups that you feel like you should adopt after you've read that particular primary paper? That is just the practical process in identification of the gap. You need to learn how to make comments. When they give you, and it's also one thing with once you can properly identify your gap, it will really help you in doing what we call critical appraisal, because most PhD students actually find themselves, you're asked to do a critical appraisal. Can you be able to perform a critical appraisal? Right? This is really the importance because it will help you to learn how to do what? Make a comment on the paper. So now let's go to the other part, maybe based on the approach. What type of approach it use, and what are the likely comments we can make based on this article? Now we look at this methodology, right? So it said that this systematic review sought empirical literature on administrating that already summarized methodological this and that. 7 biblical databases were searched, and that these were empirical evidence. Go down. Now, clearly, it looks as though because of Chinese exposure, including 29 studies which examine these beliefs, that and that. So it's also important you read the full paper, right? So you have to narrow down your topic before you start identifying your certificate. You need to really narrow it down. So the more you narrow it down, the more likely you have less papers to read. Because if your topic is so broad, I know the one question you might be asking is this really what I'm going to do for 10,000 research articles? You have to do that if your research question is so broad. But when you have a more closer question, right? It makes it very well. So it's used the what? The qualitative. So for example, now let's say use a qualitative approach. Now it means missed out using quantitative approach, right? So no searched. Now you can also make it based on where it's searched, right? Use adopted an interpretivist interpretive paradigm, right? So maybe based on the design also, maybe let's say for example, only included cross-sectional studies. There might be possible evidence, possible clearer evidence when using a what? When using a what? Randomized control trial. So on and on, right? So you look at we critique the data analysis method, right? And think of what you feel should be missing out. So the same thing, let's say the systematic review was conducted in UK, missed out on a lot of countries or study setting could be conducted in Africa in low and or middle income country, low and middle income countries. ETC, right? So you go to the type of outcome. Only show now. This is what we mean by the outcome here. Now look at it. There's okay, good. He said the association between IPV exposure and this thing varies widely, such as this, that, and that, and that. Mental health symptoms, belief about violence and emotion regulation, differentially influencing outcome, inconsistency in measures, and now you might look at all these things. Now you might find one thing that you didn't measure. Maybe measured. You go to your table, you put it's measured this, right? So you measure this and that. You put all the outcomes, and you might not say maybe probably it missed out on beliefs and now let me tell you something you need to know. Only one single comment that you made here can lead you to identification of gap. And what it means is that you now need to search. If you now use only one of these comments and make your search again, right? That means you need to be very sure that what you have that there hasn't been any systematic review, and you're able to clearly bring out a comment, right? Why you need to do what? That's the matter. So it's just very simple, right? So the next thing I do now is what? I move on to the next study, right? So maybe if you want to make your judgment based on title, only the title of the study, you might just be looking at it, romantic this, just okay, maybe you have something in mind. If you're using a subjective approach, right? You have something in mind that you want to put, you put all the titles and check all the databases, you search it here, right? You search it on European PMC, you search on PubMed, and at the end of the day, right? Maybe I can try to put this, search it here as well. This is what I mean when I search it, right? So I'm actually definitely going to see I'm getting 51,000 results here. And imagine I search it on Google Scholar, I'm getting 16,000 results. So it means that your gap identification process has to be detailed. So the more narrower your research question, the more you're able to find out what is missing. So that at the end of the day, let's say at the end of the day, you now make your overall comment. Possible gap is already from all the comments you've made here. A lot of gap has emanated. Maybe let's say this study was conducted in 2010. Outdated, needs a recent evidence. You can now choose anything from here to formulate your topic. And remember that once you choose the same topic, but you change the title, a current evidence, it means that what? You now need to do what? Argue that in your rationale, that you found a study by Evans 2010. Right? But there is a similar study by Evans 2010. But to the best of your knowledge, there is no recent study that the gap exists in current evidence. Gap exists in focus. Gap exists in type of population. Gap exists in exposure. Gap exists in type of methodology. Gap exists in location. There hasn't been any study. I have found a lot of systematic reviews in Kenya, but to the best of my knowledge, I haven't seen anyone in Nigeria. That's its gap. An outcome, maybe it's measured, maybe death rates, or it's measured mortality variables, or it's measured what? pregnancy, 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 or maybe child loss, whatever. You might not say maybe gap exists in no outcome on this. You put it. This is just practically how we have everything in life today. People are sitting down somewhere thinking of what is missing, trying to use it to, in short, even healthcare research or doing a systematic review is way easy to identify gaps, because from what we have here already, right? We can just literally play around variables and find what is missing. Like this now, we can already see what is missing now. We can see that adults is missing unless we do the search. And when we do the search among adults and we don't find adults, that means there is gap in literature there. That is just how it is. Based on outcome, we can just do the search. And when we read the papers, remember that you have to read the papers and we don't find the gap. And we find that it's missing. That means there's practical gap. So this is just how simple and easy it is. Don't worry with all these things about search strategy. I'm sure it's already looking very simple now. We are really very, 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 we really enjoyed this session because of how simple this approach is. So I can go on, like the table is on, I can go on, and I'm going to share this table with us with examples. We can go on there, make our comments. I can't wait to see your comments. Make your comment, numerous comments. You remember, you can, like I said before, you can change some of these headings as it fits to your field, right? To what is required. And then make comments on articles. Learn how to write. Make a lot of comments. Read those articles. Make comments. Continue making comments, right? Because the more you make comments, the more you find new things that is missing in literature. And when you now find out new things, you still search it. If you see anything like you still make comments. That is how it is. And at the end of the day, you come up with your research question. This way now, I've already come up with like 10 words. I can come up with several research questions. I can already see, we can see gaps only in one article that is existing in that article. Now, what our overall gap now will be is that when we now make judgments in a lot of articles, right? Based on our own judgment, we can now have a table here, which I now call our overall gap, which is based on the topic we have in mind. Maybe we might now have the topic which we now want our overall That's maybe more like possible title. So that possible title now is now based on the fact that we've now searched to make sure that there are primary articles, because remember that for you to conduct a systematic review, you need primary articles, because some of the reasons why people fail in systematic review is because they come up with a very unique topic, but there is no primary article, and they begin to mess up their research question. So I want to use this opportunity to thank each and every one of us, for staying up to this point, right? So the next part is going to be our practice questions. So I've just given us practice questions. So I'm going to send the slide to us. So you can just go out there, practice, use diabetes among adults, come up with a lot of questions, identify gaps. Contraceptives among teenage girls. I'm sure we can now identify gaps in literature. HIV in neonates, type 2 diabetes, COVID-19 in pregnancy, Ebola. You can add as many more. I'll send the table to us. Use it and more. I'm sure the table is already here. It's already in this framework. You can just use it or make your own table. Use your paradigm. Your gap might be based on paradigm. It's used a quantitative approach, but you want to do what? Use the a mixed method approach. It can be anything. So I want to really thank each and every one of us for this session. So, but before I end, I'm just going to give a very short rundown of everything that I said. So I started by introducing myself, right? And we explained about gaps in literature, systematic review, research gap. We talked about the rationale, in systematic review. We talked about the considerations when we want to identify our gap. We looked at the tabulation approach, which is very simple and easy. And we also talked about the Boolean search methods, right? Then we had a very small practical on where to start. where I left us with research questions. So we started by looking at this baby like standing on the paradigm. Then she has the research questions, and they all have something that they are looking at, right? So thinking about what is new. And went further to explain the research gap as a 7-year-old, just something that is missing, which is just very clear, right? So once there's something missing, that means you need to find something. So just look at this very beautiful picture of a man that's trying to close the gap between two, bridge, just a broken bridge. Then when we now identify the systematic review research gap as what is missing, because we have a lot of research questions out there. The research question is that the research review gap is that question that has not been addressed. That is just what it is. And again, we explained it to a 7-year-old that it's just all about reading a bunch of books, right? Talking about something, but there's particularly something missing. Then we actually explained this, right? As we just tried to look at the 7 research gaps where we now made it very detailed here, talking about our research rationale, where we made it very clear that for you to write your research, the systematic review rationale, you need to tell us why you're doing it. And so some of the things you need to consider is it based on what is it going to inform policy? Why do we need it? Why now? Do you want funding? Just tell us the why. It doesn't matter how awkward your why seems to be, right? So it's just why do you want to pick that game? Why did you choose your girlfriend over your ex? Why is it that your ex wants to serve you her invitation letter next week? So just why, right? So then we moved on by talking about the considerations for identification of gaps, where we know that we need to put a lot of things in our mind before we start gap identification. Because if you come inside there blank, you don't have anything to talk about literally, right? You need to have something in mind before you come to identify your gap. So you need to be thinking about which population group am I likely looking at, but this article is not talking about, is missing out on. So it is when you now start making your comments that all these things we have to start playing around. So you also interventions, we talk about interventions, right? There are a lot of interventions out there, you talk about maybe it could be digital health intervention. You need to have all these things in mind before you start making your comments. Because if you don't have all these things in mind, you really struggle to identify the gap in research. To look at location, study settings, areas like Africa, Egypt, and all those places, right? We also look at outcomes. That outcomes could also inform our gap, because certain systematic reviews could measure other things that we are not really interested in, right? Then the gap means that when we now check literature and see that other systematic reviews has not really done that, then we can actually choose that. Then talk about study designs can also inform our gap, right? Because it's possible that for us to have systematic reviews that has focused on a particular design, but then we have this design in mind, then that could help us in informing our gap. Same thing applies to our methodologies, right? So it could be qualitative, quantitative, but we want to do a mixed method, right? So that is how we initiate our gap. So it could also be based on our comparator group, right? So maybe placebo, standard healthcare, whatever we want to compare. So actually explain all these things. It could also be based on duration of study, right? Duration of intervention, right? That could actually be one that will inform on what our gap. Then we also talk about health conditions as well, which we explore lots of them. We'll talk about HIV, diabetes, malaria, workplace violence, and a lot of them. We talk about healthcare providers, and it could also be possible for you to identify your gaps by narrowing it down to that particular healthcare provider. Then we now talked about cultural context, it can also inform our gap identification process as well as our barriers and facilitators. So we also talked about work policies and practice and time duration. And we also talked about there are also other like measurable tools. Maybe you are doing a study that uses a questionnaire. So let's say mostly in primary research, you want to use an interview. So it just depends on how you intend to approach it. So it could also be the help belief model. So we also formulated a clear model that we can use in identification of our gap, which is what we call the Sentinel model, right? Where you can actually adjust it to how it suits to your field. and you're able to review literature and make comments. And also remember that the gap identification comments are subjective. You are the one to make it. There is no expected comment. It's based on your knowledge. It's based on how much information you have and what you really want to do. That will inform your comments. Then we move on to practice, where we use the workplace violence in teenage, among teenage marriage. Yeah, then we did our search. We performed our search, right, with Boolean search strings, right, where we try to search, spelling variants. Spelling variants are quite different. We use the on Boolean operator, and we also stated clearly that this Boolean operator is also going to be explained in detail in our search strategy session, where we also talk about other type of search strings like truncations, wildcards. We have brackets, which we use anyway, and some of other closing tags that we use. And also we have other process of search, which I forgot to mention, which is also the manual searching, where you can search reference list of articles, right? So you can try to go through the reference list of several articles and perform your search. So I want to thank you guys so much for staying up to this session. I hope it was really, really a very wonderful session. I want to really thank you guys for the patience, and I'm sure we are really, really saturated. Yeah. So somebody asked, can we consider other research types like this? So somebody's asking. Okay, good. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. I see we really understood it. Okay, yeah, welcome, Salam. This is the best training you've attended so far. That's great. So, Pelumi, ask your question while I'm going through the comments. So we close the session. So I'm going to take just 2 questions. We'll close the session.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for that wonderful section. It was really impactful. Thank you so much. Okay, so my question is that when making the critical appraisal, are we going to only focus on the abstracts, that we are not going into the research paper in details? And then how do we prioritize papers even after we've selected review papers at the filter section? So how do we prioritize the papers? And then are we only going to use review papers, not like the primary research papers, or how are we going to go about it? How do we move?
All right, beautiful. That's a very beautiful question. Now, the first question you asked about is if we're going to read the abstract, right? So no, let's say you're a PhD student, right? Or whichever student you happen to be, and you want to start your research. So the first place you must go through the papers in details to get full information. So unless maybe there is limitation in the paper, you're not able to get the full draft of the paper, but it's very important to read the full paper to have a clear picture. Because let's say, for example, now, let's say research gap identification is not different from marriage. Let's say somebody wants to marry now, right? So I'm looking for a girl with good character. I'm not just going to judge based on maybe, okay, then some people actually say, yeah, she is very beautiful and whatever, right? So I'm not just going to judge based on her being beautiful and quiet. So her being beautiful and maybe quiet at first instance is her abstract. So for me to identify gaps from a lot of girls I'm going to meet, so probably I might have to date so many girls, right? So I have to know their behavior, stay with them, go on dates with them, go through the full text. So if she doesn't want to show me her she doesn't want to, maybe probably some guys might say maybe she has to come over, right? Which is to show me her full text. Then I might throw the paper out, right? So meaning I can't be able to just judge the paper based on what the abstract. So this is just what it's like. So just like dating, right? So now the second question now you ask is if you're just going to prioritize reviews or articles. So now if you're doing your gap identification for primary research, let's say you want to do a research in Ghana Metropolis now, right? So a lot of things should shape your thoughts when you want to identify the gap. First thing you need to think about it. You're thinking about, first of all, has it been done in Ghana based on what we clearly displayed here? right? Based on what? Location, right? Now, another gap now is maybe you've now found that it's the same topic. You might now start asking yourself, okay, it is a cross-sectional design. That means if I do it, I'm just duplicating, I'm just doing the same thing. So no, let me use an interview, let me do a qualitative study. That way, there is gap. You found a study that is similar that use quantitative. No, you want to use what? You want to use a what? Qualitative. It use the other study use quantitative, you want to use quantitative approach. So it means that you're only checking primary papers. I am looking for a girl. I'm not checking for girls in class. Girls in class girls in one class is a systematic review of a whole bunch of girls that came together in a class. So it means that if I want to choose girls in class if I want to choose girls in class, then that means I have to start checking based on classes. If I enter this class, I check the type of girls inside this class. If they are all fair girls, if they are not, I move to the next class. If they are all dark girls, I move to the next class. That is, if you're looking for systematic review, if you're checking for your gap in systematic review, you are only looking at systematic review papers. You know, if you look at the example that I gave here, right? I set my filter. So what am I going to do here now? I set my filter to what? Review article. Immediately it drops. Means that it saves me the stress of having to be opening an article and finding out that it's a what primary article, whereas I'm trying to identify gap in what systematic review. Now, also I didn't talk about scoping review. So a scoping review is not a systematic review. So once it's a scoping, you shift out. So it can be a type of traditional paper, like in our first day at this training, we talk about traditional literature review, right? So it can be that somebody published a seminar work or a type of traditional literature review, right? So that is out. It's still out. So that way you narrow it down. So if it's that you're identifying gap for scoping review, so if you see a systematic review, it's out. That is just how it works. I think I don't know what your second question was.
Okay, you've answered it, sir. You've answered it, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Absolutely. So I don't know if there's another question, one more question, and I'm out. Okay, Florence. My friend. Florence. Right. Go ahead.
No, I don't have a question.
Okay, all right. So I want to really thank you guys so much. You know, it was really a pleasure having each and every one of you here. I wish you guys the very, very best luck. So I'm hoping we are ready to start our newest systematic review, right? At least with all the training, we're going to send this video to us. You know, we should be starting our very next systematic review, right? So
I don't know whether if you can get the template of that rough work.
Yes, we'll definitely get it. We will.
Thank you very much.